Commander David Blackwell stood in the observation window of Earth orbital dock, watching the stars twinkle against the endless black of space. He was 63 years old now, and his body felt every single year of it. His hands, once quick and precise, had developed a slight tremor that he tried to hide from his colleagues. His back ached from decades of crawling through narrow maintenance tunnels. His eyes, though still sharp, needed reading glasses for the smallest text on his screens. 40 years. 40 years he had served the Coalition, maintaining their ships, fixing their systems, keeping their fleet operational through countless wars and conflicts across the galaxy. Tomorrow David would retire. He would leave the dock, go back to Earth, and spend his remaining years in peace. Maybe he would buy a small house near the ocean. Maybe he would finally read all those books that had been collecting dust on his shelves. Maybe he would just sit and watch the sunset without worrying about hull breaches or power failures or anything else. The thought made him smile. But first there was one last job. His supervisor had called him into the office that morning and given him an assignment. It was supposed to be easy. Perfect for a final mission before retirement. David had to repair the USS Meridian, a derelict cruiser that had been discovered drifting near the Kepler expanse. The ship had been dormant for 15 years, abandoned after the siege of Andromeda. The military had declared it a complete loss, too damaged to be worth saving. But the Coalition wanted to salvage what they could before scrapping it. It's basic work, his supervisor had said, not even looking up from his desk. System checks, replace a few parts, recover valuable equipment. Nothing complicated. You could do it in your sleep, Blackwell. Perfect last assignment. David hadn't argued. He never did. He simply nodded, took the access codes, and made his way to the docking bay where the Meridian was waiting. Now, standing in front of the massive ship, David realized something was very wrong. The reports he had received before arriving were incomplete. They did not tell the full story of what he was seeing. The Meridian was not just damaged. She was broken in ways that suggested something far worse than the official story claimed. The hull was covered in deep scars. Massive breaches gaped like open wounds across the starboard side. Corroded plating hung in twisted sheets from the framework, telling the story of a ship that had been exposed to radiation and cosmic particles for a very long time. The exterior lights were dark. The communication arrays were shattered. Even from a distance, David could see that the Meridian looked more like a ghost than a ship. David took a breath and activated his personal access code. The airlock door groaned open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. He grabbed his portable scanner and a flashlight from the equipment locker and stepped inside. The door sealed behind him with a soft hiss. The interior of the Meridian was cold. Not just cold from the vacuum of space outside, but cold in a way that made David's skin crawl. It was the cold of abandonment, of emptiness, of a place where no living thing had walked in many years. His footsteps echoed through the silent corridors as he made his way deeper into the ship. He began his inspection, running his scanner over the systems he passed. Everything was dead. Power systems were offline. Backup batteries were depleted. Water recirculation was frozen. Life support was completely inactive. It was exactly what he expected from a ship that had been drifting for 15 years. Nothing unusual. Nothing worth noting. But then something caught his attention. His scanner detected something that should not have been possible. Deep in the ship's core, the AI backup systems were still active. Very faint, barely drawing any power at all, but definitely online. Someone had been maintaining those systems. Someone had kept them running all this time. David's curiosity was now fully awakened. He made his way through the maze of corridors toward the command deck. When he arrived, what he found made him stop dead in his tracks. The command console showed signs of recent activity. Files had been accessed. Data had been read. The timestamp on the access logs was only a few weeks old. Someone had been aboard this ship recently. Someone had been here working on the systems and then they had left. David's heart began to beat faster. He moved quickly through the command area, scanning everything looking for answers. And then he found something that made his blood run cold. The cryobay section was showing a different kind of signal. Not the dead emptiness he had found throughout the rest of the ship, but something else. Something biological. David moved toward the cryobay with careful steps. His scanner was beeping softly, growing more insistent as he approached. The readings did not make sense. There was something inside one of the cryopods. Something that was still alive. After 15 years in the void, something was still breathing inside a frozen pod. David's hands shook slightly as he approached the access panel. His weathered fingers hovered over the buttons. Every instinct told him to report this immediately. But something else, something deeper in his nature, told him to investigate first. To understand what he was looking at before he told anyone else. He activated his personal display to read the data more clearly. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly an alert appeared on the screen in bold red letters. His eyes widened as he read the message. Occupant detected. Revival protocol intact. Authorization required. David stared at the message for a long moment. His last assignment before retirement was supposed to be simple. It was supposed to be easy. But standing here in the cold darkness of the Meridian, reading those words on his personal display, David knew that nothing about this mission was going to be simple at all. Someone was sleeping inside that cryopod, and they had been sleeping for a very long time. And now David had to make a choice about what to do. David stood alone in the darkness of the cryo bay, his hand hovering over the access panel. The alert on his screen continued to pulse with urgent red light. His mind raced through all the protocols and procedures he had learned in 40 years of service. He should contact his supervisor immediately. He should report this discovery and wait for further instructions. That was what the manual said. That was what the rules demanded. But something inside David made him hesitate. If there was a person inside that pod, a real human being who had been frozen for 15 years, they needed to know that the world had changed. They needed to know what had happened to their ship, their mission, and their life. More than that, David's instinct told him that official channels might not be the best way to handle this situation. Something felt wrong about the whole thing. The story he had been told about the Meridian did not match what he was seeing here. David made a decision that would change everything. He pressed his authorization code into the panel. The cryopod began to wake up. Mechanical systems that had been dormant for so long suddenly came back to life. David heard them grinding and straining as they tried to remember their purpose. Steam began to hiss from vents around the pod. The temperature inside started to rise. Lights flickered on, casting strange shadows across the bay. The pod's door slowly slid open, revealing a cloud of frozen mist. David waited as the vapor cleared, his flashlight beam cutting through the cold cloud. A figure lay inside the pod, completely still. A woman. Her skin was pale from the years of suspension, but she was breathing. Her chest rose and fell slowly, steadily. Monitors around the pod began to beep as her body chemistry changed, as her heart rate increased, as her mind began to return to consciousness. The woman's eyes moved beneath closed eyelids. Her fingers twitched. Her breathing became faster, more labored. She gasped suddenly as if surfacing from deep water. Her eyes opened, wide and confused, staring up at the ceiling of her frozen prison. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. She tried to move but her muscles would not obey. Years of suspended animation had left her body weak and unresponsive. David quickly began the revival protocol, following the procedures displayed on the pod screen. He injected warm fluids into her system. He activated heat lamps around her body. He placed oxygen equipment near her face to help her breathe the ship's recycled air. Minutes passed. Then 10 minutes. Then 15. Slowly, very slowly, the woman's body began to respond. Her eyes focused. Her muscles began to move. She blinked several times as if trying to remember how. After nearly 30 minutes, she tried to speak. Her voice came out as a hoarse whisper, barely louder than the hiss of the pod's cooling systems. "Water," she croaked. "I need water." David helped her sit up slowly. He gave her water from his emergency supply. She drank it greedily, then coughed and gasped for air. Her eyes began to clear, and she looked at David with confusion and fear. She saw his uniform. She saw his rank insignia. Her expression changed immediately from confusion to something darker, something that looked like alarm. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice still weak but becoming clearer. "Where is the rest of the crew? What happened? How long have I been in there?" David helped her stand on unsteady legs. She was thin, fragile, looking like a person made of glass. Her name tag was still visible on her frozen suit. It read Dr. Eleanor Vance, lead researcher. 15 years, David told her quietly. "You've been in suspension for 15 years, Doctor. The Meridian has been drifting. I was sent here to assess the damage and salvage what could be saved. I wasn't told about you." Eleanor's face went pale. She gripped David's arm tightly. 15 years? She whispered. No, that's not possible. The mission was supposed to last 6 months. We were investigating a signal from beyond the Kepler expanse. We were searching for something that shouldn't exist. And we found it. Oh God, we actually found it. David listened as Eleanor told him the truth. The USS Meridian was not a simple military vessel. It was a deep space exploration ship that had been disguised as a cruiser. The mission was classified at the highest levels. They had been searching for an anomalous signal coming from a region of space that should have been empty. And they had found something extraordinary. A structure. A gateway. Something that was clearly artificial but clearly not made by any species in the known galaxy. Eleanor explained how the Coalition's military command had seized control of the mission the moment they realized what they had discovered. Military officers had boarded the ship. Scientists were pushed aside. The officers wanted to know if they could weaponize the gateway, if they could use it as a weapon in their endless wars across space. Eleanor and her team had tried to stop them. They had tried to explain that the gateway was not a weapon, that it was something far more important. But the military did not listen. When the officers tried to force-activate the gateway using military technology and aggressive hacking methods, something had gone wrong. The gateway had responded by triggering protective systems that David could only imagine the power of. The explosion had torn through the meridian like a knife through paper. Most of the crew had died instantly. Eleanor had somehow made it to the cryo bay. The ship's automated systems had placed her in suspension as a last desperate act, hoping that someone would eventually find her and understand the truth. "The gateway is still here," Eleanor said, gripping David's arm even tighter. Her eyes were wide with fear and urgency. "It's sealed in the cargo bay behind failsafe systems that only I can open. No one knows it's still here." Command declared the ship a total loss and buried the entire incident. "If the Coalition finds out that I'm alive, if they know that you found me, they will not hesitate to kill us both. We need to be very careful about what we do next, Commander. We need to think about this very carefully." David felt the weight of this knowledge settle on his shoulders like a heavy coat. His simple final assignment had suddenly become something far more complicated and dangerous than he could have ever imagined. David sat with Eleanor in the small break room near the cryo bay, listening to her tell the complete story. She explained about the gateway, about its origins, about what the Coalition wanted to do with it. As she spoke, David realized that the situation was far more serious than he had initially understood. This was not just about a damaged ship or a lost crew. This was about something that could change the future of humanity itself. And it was something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. After Eleanor finished speaking, David made a decision. He would follow protocol. He would report the discovery through official channels. He would contact his supervisor and file a proper report. It seemed like the right thing to do. It seemed like the correct path to take. So David activated his communication device and sent an encrypted message up the chain of command, detailing what he had found, who he had discovered, and what Eleanor had told him about the gateway. The response came quickly. Too quickly. Within 1 hour, his supervisor had acknowledged the report. Within 2 hours, military vessels had changed their course and were now accelerating toward Earth orbital dock. David monitored the communications on the Meridian's old systems, watching as military ships moved into position. At first, he told himself they were coming to investigate properly, to understand what had happened, to help them. But as he watched more carefully, he noticed something that made his stomach turn cold. The number of ships was wrong. The composition of the fleet was wrong. These were not investigation ships. These were destroyers. Heavy combat vessels. Attack fighters. Interceptors. The kind of ships that were sent to eliminate problems, not to study them. And then David intercepted fragments of encrypted military communications. The messages were brief, in military code, but his 40 years of experience had taught him how to recognize certain patterns and phrases. The fragments he managed to decode made his blood run cold. The words, complete elimination, no witnesses, total destruction, and classified incident, appeared in the messages. The military was not coming to help. They were coming to destroy the Meridian and everyone aboard her. They were coming to bury the truth forever. David realized in that moment that he had made a terrible mistake. His trust in the system, his belief that official channels would handle this properly, had been naive. The conspiracy was not limited to a few rogue officers or a single military branch. This went high. Very high. The highest levels of the coalition government had ordered this cover-up. They wanted the Meridian destroyed. They wanted Eleanor dead. And now they wanted David dead too, simply because he had discovered the truth. Eleanor was watching his face as he read the intercepted communications. "They're coming, aren't they?" she said quietly. It was not a question. She already knew the answer. She had lived through this nightmare once before. She had seen what the coalition was willing to do to protect its secrets. "Yes," David said simply. "They're coming. And they're coming to kill us." For a moment, neither of them spoke. David's entire career, his entire life, had been built on following orders, on trusting the chain of command, on believing that the system worked the way it was supposed to work. That belief had just shattered like glass. For 40 years he had been a loyal servant of the Coalition. And now the Coalition was trying to kill him. Eleanor stood up. "We need to leave," she said. "We need to get out of here, and we need to take the gateway data with us. If the truth gets out, if people know what the Coalition has done, if we can expose this conspiracy, they won't be able to kill us without raising too many questions." David looked at her. He knew she was right. But what she was proposing was rebellion. It was treason against the Coalition. It was abandoning 40 years of service and loyalty. It was choosing a path that could only lead to him becoming a fugitive, hunted for the rest of his life. But then again, what other choice did he have? If he stayed, if he did nothing, he would die here. The Coalition would destroy the Meridian, and they would create some false story to explain what had happened. They would say David had made a piloting error, that the ship had been destroyed in an accident. Eleanor would be erased from history. The gateway would remain hidden. The truth would die with them. "How much time do we have?" David asked. Eleanor checked the old tactical displays. "The military fleet is still 30 minutes away. Maybe less if they accelerate further." "We don't have much time, Commander. We need to move now." David moved into action. His hands, steady now despite his age, began working across the Meridian systems. He knew this ship. He knew every system, every circuit, every backup power line. He rerouted power from the emergency reserves into systems that should have been completely dead. He bypassed security protocols using access codes that only someone with his experience and clearance could know. He began the startup sequence for the old jump drive, a system that had not been used in 15 years. Eleanor worked beside him, accessing the ship's research archives. She used David's authorization codes to move through security layers, uploading encrypted files containing all the research data about the gateway to civilian networks across the solar system. The files moved through multiple channels, distributed across thousands of different servers where the Coalition could never find them all, could never erase them completely. The truth was beginning to escape, like light breaking through cracks in a wall. Alarms suddenly blared throughout the ship. The military vessels had opened fire on the dock. Explosions rattled the Meridian's hull. David's hands flew across the control panels with desperate speed. The cargo bay section, the section containing the gateway, began to detach from the main body of the ship. David entered jump coordinates into the navigation system, sending them toward a region of space so remote that no one would think to look for them there. "Go!" Eleanor shouted. "The drive is almost ready." The jump drive screamed to life, its power building to levels that made the entire ship shudder. Weapons fire from the military vessels struck the dock where the Meridian had been docked, but the ship was already beginning to move. Energy crackled around the jump drive as it tore open a hole in space-time itself. "Hold on," David commanded. The Meridian jumped. Reality twisted around them, and they were gone, leaving only empty space and debris behind. The jump drive shut down with a violent shudder that threw both David and Eleanor against the hard metal walls of the control room. David's shoulder struck the edge of a console, sending sharp pain through his arm. Eleanor crashed into a support beam and gasped for air as the wind was knocked from her lungs. For several long moments neither of them moved. They simply lay on the cold floor, breathing heavily, waiting for their bodies to stop shaking from the violence of the jump. Slowly David pushed himself up on his elbows. His shoulder throbbed with pain, but he could move it. Nothing was broken. He helped Eleanor to her feet. She was pale and trembling, but she was alive. They were both alive. They had made it through the jump. David moved to the navigation console and checked their position. His hands were still shaking from adrenaline, making it difficult to focus on the readouts. After several minutes, the sensors finally confirmed their location. They were light years away from Earth. Incredibly far. Farther than any civilian ship typically traveled. The region of space around them was empty, devoid of any known stations or settlements. It was exactly where David had programmed them to go. "We made it," Eleanor whispered, staring at the star field displayed on the main screen. "We actually made it." But David was not celebrating. He was looking at the damage reports scrolling across his console. The jump drive had overloaded catastrophically during activation. Multiple systems had failed. Coolant lines had ruptured. Power relays had burned out. The entire drive system was beyond repair. Not damaged, beyond repair. Completely, totally, irreparably destroyed. They would not be jumping again. Not this ship. Not with this drive. They were stranded in the middle of nowhere. "The drive is finished," David said quietly. "We're not going anywhere from here. We're stuck." Eleanor's expression darkened. She seemed to understand the implications of this immediately. They had escaped the coalition, but now they were marooned in an empty region of space with a damaged ship and limited supplies. Without the ability to jump, rescue would take months, years possibly, and the coalition would be searching for them. They would send ships, scanning the vast emptiness of space, looking for any trace of the meridian. Then something happened. Something that neither David nor Eleanor could have predicted or explained. Deep within the cargo bay, in the sealed section where the gateway had been stored, something changed. Lights began to flicker. Energy signatures appeared on the sensors. The gateway was activating. Not in a dangerous way, not in the violent manner that had destroyed the ship the first time. This was different. This was almost gentle. Almost deliberate, as if the gateway was waking up on its own. David and Eleanor exchanged a glance of confusion and concern. They made their way through the corridors toward the cargo bay, moving carefully through the damaged sections of the ship. When they reached the sealed doors of the cargo section, they could see through the observation windows that something extraordinary was happening inside. The gateway was glowing. Its surface, which had been dark and inert when Eleanor had last seen it, was now shimmering with light. Strange patterns moved across its surface, patterns that seemed almost alive, almost intelligent. And with the light came something else. Information. Data. A stream of knowledge flowing directly into the Meridian's computer systems. David and Eleanor watched in stunned silence as their personal neural implants, the devices that allowed them to interface with ship systems, began to receive information. The data was in a language they did not recognize, symbols and words that made no sense to their human minds. But somehow, slowly, their implants began to translate it. Piece by piece, the meaning became clear. The message was ancient. It spoke of times before human civilization had even begun. It spoke of civilizations that had risen and fallen across the galaxy, of species that had achieved impossible technologies, of knowledge that spanned millennia. And it spoke of a test. A great trial that had been set up countless ages ago by advanced beings who were now long dead. According to the message, these ancient civilizations had created a network of gateways scattered throughout the galaxy. Each gateway was more than just a doorway through space. Each one was an intelligence test. A way of measuring whether a young species had the wisdom and the cooperation and the understanding necessary to join a greater community of advanced worlds. Most species that found the gateways tried to use them as weapons. Most species attempted to weaponize them for conquest and war. Those species triggered the failsafes and destroyed themselves. But occasionally, very occasionally, a species would do something different. A species would choose cooperation over conquest. A species would choose to protect knowledge rather than exploit it. A species would choose to sacrifice power for truth. That was what the test was truly measuring. Not technological capability. Not military strength. But wisdom. Moral choice. The willingness to do what was right even when it was difficult. David and Eleanor understood what the message was telling them. Humanity had just passed the test. Not because they were stronger than other species. Not because their weapons were more powerful. But because two individuals, a human engineer and a human scientist, had chosen to risk their lives for truth. David had chosen to defy the orders of his own government. Eleanor had chosen to trust a stranger rather than remain hidden. They had chosen integrity over safety. The gateway's light intensified and more data began to flow into their systems. Star charts. Ancient knowledge. Technological secrets that could transform human civilization. And an invitation. Not a threat. Not a demand. But an invitation to join the community of advanced worlds, to learn from species that had survived and evolved for millions of years, to take humanity's place among the great civilizations of the galaxy. Eleanor looked at David, her eyes wide with wonder. "They're showing us everything," she said. "The whole galaxy. All the knowledge. All the civilizations. They want us to know that we're not alone. They want us to know that there's something greater waiting for us out there." David stared at the glowing gateway, at the impossible beauty of the data flowing into his mind. He thought about his 40 years of service, about following orders without question, about believing in a system that had betrayed him. And he realized that this moment, this discovery, this revelation, made all of it meaningful. His entire life had been leading him to this place, to this decision, to this moment when humanity would finally step forward into a larger universe. The encrypted files that Eleanor had uploaded to civilian networks before they jumped began to spread across Earth like a digital wildfire. One file here. Another file there. each one carrying fragments of the truth about the Gateway, about the Coalition's conspiracy, about what had really happened to the Meridian. The Coalition tried to contain the information, tried to shut down the networks, tried to delete the files. But they were too late. The truth had already escaped into too many places. Whistleblowers inside the Coalition government began to step forward. Military officers who had refused to follow illegal orders. Scientists who had been silenced for years. Government officials who could no longer keep silent about the corruption they had witnessed. Each person who came forward added another piece to the puzzle. Each testimony confirmed what Eleanor's files had revealed. The Coalition's leadership had known about the Gateway. They had deliberately hidden it. They had ordered the destruction of the Meridian and the murder of everyone aboard her. Within days the story was everywhere. News outlets across Earth, across the colonies, across every human settlement in space began broadcasting the truth. Governments that had been controlled by the Coalition for decades suddenly found their populations demanding answers. Citizens demanded to know why their leaders had hidden this discovery. They demanded to know why the Coalition had been willing to kill to keep this secret. They demanded to know what else they had been lied to about. The Coalition's authority began to crack and crumble like ancient stone. Different nations on Earth, different settlements in space, different groups of people who had been unified under the Coalition's military control suddenly began to think for themselves. They stopped following orders that did not make sense. They stopped accepting lies that contradicted what they knew to be true. For the first time in decades, humanity began to move away from unified military control and toward something more democratic, more honest, more human. Meanwhile, David and Eleanor remained aboard the damaged Meridian, hidden in the empty region of space where no one thought to look for them. They had established a temporary settlement in the ship's intact sections. They maintained the Gateway carefully, continuing to receive information from the ancient message that was still being transmitted. The data kept coming, still incomprehensible in many ways, but increasingly clear in its meaning. Humanity was being welcomed. Humanity was being invited to join something larger than itself. Months passed. The Coalition attempted to locate the Meridian, sending out search parties and scanning vast regions of space. But space was too large and the Meridian was too small. David and Eleanor remained hidden, isolated but safe. They continued their work, documenting everything they were learning from the Gateway, preparing reports that would help humanity understand what was coming. Then one day a new kind of ship appeared on their sensors. Not a Coalition military vessel. Something different. Something that had been constructed by a unified human effort. Delegates from multiple Earth nations had pooled their resources and built this ship. They had traced Eleanor's encrypted messages. They had followed the signals through the vast darkness of space. They had come to find David and Eleanor and, more importantly, to find the Gateway. When the delegation arrived, Eleanor and David welcomed them aboard the Meridian. The leaders of this new unified human effort were amazed by what they found. The Gateway was real. Everything that had been described in the encrypted files was confirmed. The ancient technology, the message, the invitation to join the galactic community was all real. David and Eleanor explained everything to the delegation. They described the test that the ancient civilizations had created. They explained what it meant that humanity had passed that test. They showed the visitors the star charts and the technological secrets that were contained in the Gateway's data. They helped the delegates understand that humanity stood at a threshold. The old ways, the old conflicts, the old divisions that had kept them fractured and weak were no longer acceptable. To join the galactic community, humanity would need to change. They would need to learn cooperation on a scale they had never achieved before. The delegates returned to Earth with the truth. They brought the evidence. They brought the technology samples. They brought the message from the ancient Gateway. And they brought David and Eleanor's story. The story of an old engineer and a scientist who had chosen truth over safety. The story of two people who had defied their government, risked their lives, and in doing so, had changed the fate of their entire species. The transformation was not easy or quick. There were arguments and debates. There were governments and militaries that resisted change. There were people who wanted to go back to the old ways, who wanted to weaponize the technology instead of using it to advance human knowledge. But in the end, the choice was clear. Humanity could continue as it had been, divided and weak and constantly at war with itself. Or humanity could change, could grow, could become part of something greater. The Meridian was recovered from its distant hiding place and brought back to Earth. The ship was transformed into a museum and a research center. The Gateway was carefully preserved, its technology studied and its messages carefully documented. David remained aboard as the ship's custodian and as an ambassador to the emerging galactic community. Eleanor worked alongside him, leading the research efforts that would help humanity prepare for first contact with the other advanced civilizations. On David's official retirement day, a ceremony was held aboard the Meridian. Representatives from every human nation attended. They gathered in the cargo bay, standing before the glowing gateway, and they honored David Blackwell for his service. Not just his 40 years of military service, but for his final mission. For his courage in choosing what was right over what was easy. For his willingness to stand against corruption. For his final repair before retirement that had not been a repair of metal and machinery, but a repair of humanity's course itself. David stood among the crowd of delegates and officials, and he thought about his life. He thought about the ships he had maintained, the systems he had repaired, the countless hours he had spent in the darkness of space keeping humanity's fleet operational. All of that work, all of that dedication, all of that loyalty had led him to this moment. To this choice. To this discovery that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that the greatest repair they could ever make was to fix the broken parts of themselves. As David watched the delegates file past the gateway, as he saw the wonder and hope in their faces, he smiled. His last assignment before retirement had changed everything. And now, finally, he could rest, knowing that he had done something that truly mattered.